Are we now witnessing the emergence of an informal Gulf Israel military bloc that is primarily focused on containing Iran?
One alliance appears to be between Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Qatar, Pakistan, Egypt.
India has deepened strategic and economic ties with Gulf monarchies and Israel simultaneously, while Pakistan's Gulf relationships remain heavily security oriented.
China already was waiting in the wings, and it had a large trade volume with Iran as well as Saudi Arabia, and it is eyeing that opportunity, and it is going to be the biggest gainer of this conflict. What are the limits of American power? Those also have been quite exposed.
Israeli defense minister has said that they have imported 6,500 tons of military equipment in the last 24 hours. Shahram Irani said that soon they are coming up with a weapon that will terrify their enemy. Hello and welcome to another episode. Today we are joined by Brigadier Rashid Wali Janjua, who is a distinguished Pakistani security analyst, an academic, and a retired military officer with over 32 years of experience. Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Thank you so much.
Sir, thank you so much for joining. Today we will talk about the new great game in the Middle East. And in this context, my first question to you is that Pakistan has historically maintained military and economic ties with Saudi Arabia while also sharing a sensitive border and complex sectarian dynamics with Iran. As the Middle Eastern rivalries intensify, can Pakistan realistically maintain strategic neutrality, or will future regional conflicts eventually force Islamabad to choose a side?
Pakistan has to navigate these choppy waters of conflictual relationship between two Muslim countries. But there are some headwinds also, and there are some tailwinds also. The headwinds are created by the spoilers, both hardliners in both the countries. But as far as the tailwinds are concerned, there is a visible thaw between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and which bodes well for a meaningful, sustained relationship which is based upon long-term interests. And Pakistan, I think, is eyeing those commonalities of interest and is focused on that. And Pakistan, in fact, has tried its best to create convergences between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and some of those efforts have borne fruit as well. In this whole conflict, we have seen that despite Iranian indiscriminate attacks on GCC countries, Saudi Arabia has been spared much of the destructive attack. Though there will be challenges, of course, it all depends on how this war concludes. What is the post-war security architecture in the Middle East, and where the respective alliances that are going to pan out after the conflict subsides. Those alliances and the overall security architecture will determine the stability of Middle East, and Pakistan naturally has to navigate these challenges very carefully. But as far as its own policy is concerned, so far it has followed a very balanced policy vis-a-vis Iran and Saudi Arabia. Both have economic and political, cultural linkages, and the flavor of both the relationships is different, yet it has a lot of commonalities. So, in short, my answer is that there would be challenges, but there are opportunities as well, and we should look towards those opportunities.
Okay. Sir, as Israel has deepened its intelligence cooperation with the UAE, it also deployed its Iron Dome system in UAE in order to help counter Iranian missiles and drone threats. Are we now witnessing the emergence of an informal Gulf Israel military bloc that is primarily focused on containing Iran?
Already there are alignments which are shaping up, and one alliance appears to be between Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Qatar, Pakistan, Egypt, and another between UAE, Israel, India, and possibly with the overall support of United States. So that was the old ITU-2, which predates this conflict. But there is also a possibility that we find an end to this conflict, which integrates Iran into the international financial system, or at least in an incremental manner, to get them back, and the nuclear question gets resolved, and those fears of proxies and Iran's nuclear program, those are assuaged, and the Israeli predatory instincts and its desire to expand also gets a little moderated as a consequence of that agreement. But these alliances, if the Middle East gets split, one of the indications is that UAE has just opted out of OPEC and also OPEC Plus. So that was not an economic decision, that was more a geopolitical decision. And that does not augur well for Middle East, a common security approach, and also for the economic and political consolidation of the GCC. So we live in hope that GCC does not get split any further, but it looks like that some kind of for some time to come, there would be those two alliances that I just alluded to, competing and jockeying for influence in the Middle Eastern politics.
Okay. Sir, can you please just briefly tell us that in the present context, in the current scenario, the Abraham Accords and the increasing security cooperation between certain Gulf monarchies and Israel have reshaped the regional diplomacy. But after the Gaza war and the recent conflicts, do Gulf rulers now see Israel as a strategic partner or a risky ally? Because obviously they will have to face the anger of their public internally in their countries on Gaza war.
Of course, you're right, because in the past also there was a gulf between the street and the government in the Gulf, because people were thinking differently, and the Gulf kingdoms and monarchies, they were keeping them in good humor through increased welfare and more inclusive political engagement. And Abraham Accords is also a consequence of an attempt under the overall, benevolent gaze of Americans to integrate Israel into alliance structure of Middle East, and to ensure that continual threats to its security are completely assuaged. So that was all very well based upon a common religion, common ancestry, and the linkages that are based upon blood and kinship. So that was the kind of flavor that was peddled, and the objective was that instead of a complete conflictual relationship, the countries of Middle East should integrate with Israel, and that way Israel's security is also underwritten, and that of its Arab partners. But that was an idealistic approach, and such initiatives bore partial fruit by way of inclusion of Bahrain, UAE, Sudan, Morocco, and countries like these into Abraham Accords. And there was a lot of pressure on Saudi Arabia, where the locus of the political and economic power lies in the Middle East. But all those attempts withered on the vine of Israeli aggression and obduracy vis-a-vis Palestinians, and the spurning of the two-state solutions by Israel, which was essentially peddled by Saudi Arabia, that put paid to the fructification of this relationship based upon Abraham Accords. So Abraham Accord at the moment also remains constrained because of these political alignments and the conflicts that are shaping the security architecture in Middle East. And I think that in future, Israel has to moderate its policies, and whether it is capable of doing so under the stewardship of the likes of Likud government stewards like Netanyahu is a moot point, and other pretenders to the crown like Naftali, they're also pretty much hardliners when it comes to policies vis-a-vis Palestinians, West Bank, Southern Lebanon. And I believe they want to go and go to the hustings in elections, which are just 7 months to go in Israel, and display Gaza, Southern Lebanon, and the West Bank as a trophy to win at the hustings. Otherwise, an electoral defeat is staring them in the face, and the meaning of that electoral defeat for Netanyahu personally is a jail sentence because of its problems with the judiciary. So, the spoiler role of Israel has to be factored in, and herein lies the astuteness and the efficacy of American political and diplomatic clout over Israel, that it has to moderate its behavior. And if that happens, then I think these splits that we are witnessing in the GCC and the Middle Eastern political structure, those could also be mended, and a lasting relationship could be established even with Iran if sufficient guarantees are given to Iran that it would not be attacked in the future, and it would be integrated in the international economic and political system as a sovereign country. And but that will take a while, because even if the process starts, the sanctions regime is such complicated because of international law. Some sanctions are international, some are bilateral, some are multilateral. So the whole process would take time, but a positive beginning has to be made, and much will depend on the political savvy, sagaciousness of the US leadership as to how much space they give. And then the Iranian legendary pragmatism has to come into play, and they have to take care of the internal differences within the power structure in Iran, especially after the elimination of their top tier leadership.
Yes. Sir, if we talk about India, India has deepened strategic and economic ties with Gulf monarchies and Israel simultaneously, while Pakistan's Gulf relationships remain heavily security oriented. Has India quietly outmaneuvered Pakistan in the Middle East through economic diplomacy and connectivity projects?
Not so far, but they are trying their very best. And their leverages are obviously a large population that is working in the Gulf, and their economic muscle, their ability to provide the uh, business and technological partnerships, infrastructural linkages and connectivity that you just alluded to. And they had started with this ITU2. They were laying a lot of emphasis on IMEC. That was a infrastructure project of maritime and land-based routes connecting India with the UAE, and then from there onwards to Israel, and then to Europe through Eastern Mediterranean coasts. But those all proved to be a pie in the sky because of the insecurity and instability in the Middle East. And after the Gaza war, especially that IMEC initiative was completely stalled. But the efforts would be on, and let's not discount India's ability on an economic front and to flex its muscle. But unfortunately, Indians have not played their cards very well during this conflict. They have annoyed Iran. They have, gone to great lengths to appease Israel, which might not resonate well even with the Gulf monarchies. So, a balanced relationship that is based upon real politics as well as the liberal internationalism should have been the policy that was that was to be adopted by Indians. But since they are so much under the influence of Hindutva ideology that basically uh, privileges uh, isolationism and of countries like Pakistan, and internal subjugation of its own population. So that when that kind of a mindset drives the policies, the mistakes are bound to happen.
Okay, fair. Sir, some analysts argue that the Middle East is moving from ideological politics towards transactional realism, where economic corridors, trade routes, and energy cooperation, energy security matter more than the old sectarian divisions. Do you believe the region is genuinely entering a post-ideological era?
Well, I don't really believe that the region has entered a post ideological era. Ideology, politics, internal differences, schisms, those still drive the politics, and politics influences the economics and connectivity. But there's no gainsaying the fact that these old shibboleths need to be avoided and need to be abandoned. And some Gulf countries have also shown by their policies, like UAE, especially, they have, I think, shown a model which is based upon pure economics and business interests. They have leveraged their geography to create business proposition for the whole world, despite relative deficit in resources with countries like Saudi Arabia. Dubai has showcased itself as a place where people can come and settle and do business. So those forces of economics, business interests, and internal openness, those are driving the politics. But post-ideological era is still a far cry. I think that will take some time to fully entrench itself.
Okay. Moving towards the end, I would like to ask you that recently the Israeli defense minister has said that they have imported 6,500 tons of military equipment in the last 24 hours. He said that yesterday, I guess. Whereas the Iranian Rear Admiral Shahram Irani said that soon they are coming up with a weapon that will terrify their enemy. If another large scale regional war erupts involving Iran, Israel, and the Gulf states, what could be the spillover effects for Pakistan, despite the fact that it is trying its best to mediate between US and Iran? And we cannot, at the same time, we cannot also ignore the fact that Pakistan shares borders with Afghanistan, Iran, and India.
I'll not dismiss these statements as mere posturing, but let me say that in a charged environment, both protagonists in the conflict equation. They jockey for position before they come on to a negotiating table. They
Okay.
try and maximize their gains diplomatically. They want to psych the other actor out through these initial preliminary maneuvers. And I believe it is so because the statements that are emanating from social media, from internal handles of IRGC, Twitter, and other platforms, those differ from the sounds and noises that we hear coming on through the official channels. And lately also, Wall Street Journal has published an article in which they have pointed that Iranians have showed some kind of a softness, and probably they are ready for an agreement that is based upon sanctions relief linked with their concessions on the nuclear issue. So that shows that there is a desire, and probably the naval blockade, that was the biggest asymmetric response by United States, is biting and squeezing Iran hard because they've got few days of storage left. And even there are news that they are the oil wells and the storage equation is getting worse for them. And if their wells have to be stopped, it takes a lot of effort and resources to restart those. So Iranians, which were entirely dependent on oil revenue, and especially at a time once they are hit by sanctions, this blockade is hurting them a lot. And whether they'll come to an agreement with the United States or not, it is all contingent upon their sagacity and pragmatism based upon their cost-benefit equation, because they resorted to asymmetric tactics of blocking the Strait of Hormuz, which by no stretch of international law is kosher. International law is very clear. It's an international strait, and the right of transit and the right of innocent passage is available to international shipping. And GCC, European Union, Asian countries, United States, no one would countenance closure of international states. So if international states like Strait of Hormuz is opened, blockade is lifted, some sanction relief is given, and Iranians do make genuine concessions on their uranium enrichment, I think both actors they can play ball. But these statements, and especially the hardened stance of the U.S. administration, there are statements by President Trump which still say that they are not happy with the Iranian proposals. So that does not bode well for an agreement which would be sustainable. But I'm hopeful. At least Pakistan is playing its cards well. Pakistan is doing its best, and if those convergences yield an agreement, I think then these posturings and these statements, those would eclipse. The more important thing is that the substantial and the substantive issues need to be addressed. That is opening of the international states, because it is impacting the global economy a lot. Enrichment issue, that the fears and concerns of Americans, the rest of the international community, especially Israel, those have to be assuaged. And then the United States also has to give space to Iranians. And when they come to a negotiating table, both must treat themselves as respected actors in a conflict equation. And unless you respect the dignity of a country which is sovereign, the hardliners, those get traction. So this is the pearl of high price both protagonists have to chase in this conflict equation.
Okay. Sir, my last question to you is that as you just said that the US also needs to give space to the Iranians. The recent conflicts have exposed doubts about the reliability of American security guarantees in the Gulf. As trust in Washington fluctuates, could we witness a new regional order where Gulf states simultaneously engage with China, Russia, Israel, Iran, and even South Asia powers in a multi-aligned balancing strategy rather than relying on the dominant patron, that is USA, or one dominant patron?
The dominant Leviathan that the United States was before this conflict is going to give space to other actors like China, because China already was waiting in the wings, and it had large trade volume with Iran as well as Saudi Arabia, and it is eyeing that opportunity, and it is going to be the biggest gainer of this conflict. And the Gulf GCC countries also would see the relationship with America and the rest of the world with a different lens, because they've gone through this experience. They know what are their vulnerabilities. They know which actor provides the security umbrella, and what are the limits of American power. Those also have been quite exposed. But having said that, let's not surmise that it's the end of the US involvement and clout in the Middle East. US also will remain a very strong actor, but the influence of other countries like China is going to increase. And yes, the regional alliances will take shape. Maybe Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Egypt, and one or other country, maybe Iran, if it is integrated into the international political and economic system. This regional grouping, it becomes a political and economic bloc that acts as a win-win for all.
Okay. Sir, thank you so much for your insights today. These would be very, very helpful for our audiences.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.